Harry Sharbaugh's medical specialty was pathology. After retiring, he took a geology class at Greenfield Community College, and look what happened.
Some fellow named Richard Little spent an afternoon with me below the Turner's Falls Dam, walking through all the layers. And what a wonderful time that was. And near the end of that hike, we ended up close to the dam, and we approached the layers of black shale. And Professor Little gave me a challenge: find a whole fish. Well, to get there, you have to go through a lot of intermediary steps. The first is understanding the formation. What does the black shale represent? And how do the fish get there in the first place?
200 million years ago, back in the Jurassic period, the supercontinent of Pangaea was breaking apart. And this sets the stage for creating lakes. As Pangaea splits, rift valleys develop and lakes form. Some present-day rift valleys are found in Utah and in California. The lake shorelines shift with weather and climate changes, and if the lakes are tens of feet deep, the lake bottom will have little or no oxygen. That's very important because without oxygen, organic material does not decompose. That is the environment for black shale and great fossil preservation.
The first thing that I did there was learn the formation. So I did a top-to-bottom survey where I dug about a foot-by-foot trench from the top of the black shale all the way down to the bottom and recorded every layer that I encountered. Did I find any fish or fish parts? At this point in time, I was just happy to find a fish part. Now, the next thing that I learned was to get a complete fish, and in general they're about this big, the odds are a lot better if you can take out a piece of rock this big. So, start with large enough specimens. Instead of trying to peel these things off and look at them on site, I just took the raw specimens and brought them home, where I could go slowly and carefully through them. I was doing this 40 years ago, and here it is 40 years later. I only do a little bit each year. 8 or 10 pieces, and I'll be lucky to have 2 pieces that have a decent specimen in them. For a profession, I was a pathologist, hence I was the specimen guy. One of the standing jokes is that for a profession, I dealt with dead things, and for a hobby, I dealt with deader things. This is the largest piece that I have ever removed. Most of the pieces brought out are about half this size. They weigh between 50, 100 or more pounds. And if you're really lucky, you may get multiple specimens on one piece, which is why you try to get the largest piece possible to begin with. This particular piece, I've started to split it, and you can see I have an array of devices here. Everything from paint scrapers to things that I got from the medical world to split this out. Here's another piece. This has been sitting 30 years, freezing and thawing according to the weather. When something is loose and easily comes off, you go ahead and take it off. There, see, like there? And they'll flake right off. And then you look, there may actually be something there. I'll go back and look at that later on. This is my starter tool. If I'm starting a split and I need something very thin, very sharp, and fairly strong, I'll use these. This is a surgical blade that's had the front tip flattened off, and then I've ground it down to a very, very sharp edge along the front. Then I find my surface that I'm working on and tap very gently. There is a fish already visible, buried beneath the surface here. Here's its head, here's its body, here's its elevated backbone, which is a telltale feature I'm constantly looking for, a slightly elevated ridge, and its tail goes off in this direction. So I will mark this because without the light, you have no idea that that's there. This is fiberglass that I've put on the back edge of a specimen I have yet to prepare that has a fish inside. There's my mark for where the fish is. And now that I've given it some more strength, this will tolerate further processing without falling apart. Here's a piece. I know there's a fish there, so I've given my slash mark there. How do I get down in there to where the specimen is? And you have to remember that once you get to it, they're very thin. They're very fragile. They're easy to go through. Now that I've identified where the specimen is, I have to be very careful not to destroy that. It'll take 2 or 3 hours to expose the whole fish once I'm at this point. This particular piece shows a number of the things that can go wrong. They can be rotted, like here, or just some bones and scales here, or some rotted fish over here, or when you cut the piece out in the first place, you cut across the fish. This exemplifies what can go wrong in the hunt for the perfect fish. Black shale is lake bottom sediments, and the bottom of the lake is deep enough so that the oxygen has either decreased markedly or totally disappeared. In order to have a fossil, we have to have burial. More and more sediments pile up on top, and to finally get compression, the now dead, departed fish are transformed into fossils. Here's a nice semi-anodid fish. Think early Jurassic, 195 million year old specimen here. And here's just a free-floating fin. There's only a very thin layer of rock over the surface of the specimen, and you can see it when you rotate it in the light. It's a pretty nice specimen just like that. No further prep necessary. And boy, do I like things that have no assembly required. I will take larger pieces and x-ray the pieces. X-rays can show you what's on the inside. What's fascinating about this, we all expected the fish, but these are all small coprolites. In this particular fish, I've taken acid, muriatic acid, and dissolved out the fossil. And this is the imprint of the fossil in the black shale. And then, once you've done that, you can take a mixture of black mottle stain and stove black and stain them up. And you get what looks like the actual fossil. And you can often see details here that you can't see on the actual fish. Here's a nice semi-anodid, buried in there, but he processed out very nicely. And because there's 2 sides to this, I didn't want to fiberglass the back, so I fiberglassed a ring around the outside to hold these pieces together. The back is a pile of rotted fish remains, but just a little bit removed was a layer that had a perfectly preserved fish. Well, there is a sequence to rotting that occurs. This can be called taphonomy, the science of decomposition. Okay, here's a specimen showing some early rotting changes. Here's the head, here's the tail, and he's developing gas in his belly. And I happen to have just caught this one where the belly has blown out and then it's been fossilized. So you see an open space here, scale and body material removed down to here. It's been blown out and blown out here. He's lost some of his tail, and he's lost some of his head, and he's lost some of his scales up here, revealing the bony structure that's underneath. It's very tricky and very rare to catch one in the middle of this process like this here. So this is really a very prized specimen. This one is about as big as a semi-anodid can get. Its head is really up here. Its tail would really go back down to there. But it's rotted. He's lost his head, gas is developed within the head, that's another classic area, and losing a tail is very classic. But other than that, you can see he's a pretty large guy. He's not the biggest in the pond, but he's certainly approaching it. And this particular specimen has a little bonus. And look at this line right here. There's a little fault line going right through this. Not much displacement, but the posterior half is displaced upward relative to the anterior half. Kind of cool. The fish have been in this pond for some time. We don't know how many layers for sure. Is this 1,000 years, 10,000? Nobody knows the total duration. But it was there long enough so that some subvarieties of semianodid have had a chance to develop. Here's basically short and fat, real wide. Here's long and skinny. And up here we have extremely large. And this is as large as a semianodid can get. And if you're really, really lucky, you can get a baby. And finding younger forms of this is extremely rare because these fossils don't have a lot of bulk with them. They're extremely delicate. And the few that I have seen have been destroyed on handling, but they're rare to find and they're rarer to be able to show somebody. A nodule is when, if you have a thin layer and all of a sudden it gets real thick for a short distance and then it gets thin again. And usually in that thickened area, something is buried. Here's an example of a nodule that I've left alone. This is a coprolite from a Diplurus or coelacanth. It's the big one. How do I know what's inside there? You can do the old delicate method of take a hammer and smash it open, and look what you see. There's a long coprolite thick at one end. It strings out at the other end. Oh, you can see the fish straining to get this out. Okay, here's another nodule. I cracked it open. Once I got it open, we saw that, oh my goodness, there's fish parts inside here. What else can we encounter? That there's a lot of tectonic activity. Slickensides are fairly common. And here's one of my favorite all-time pieces. Here's a piece of black shale, and the next piece above it slid and polished this surface. So that's a classic slickenside. And you can see like linear markings here as well as the polishing. Look carefully under the slickenside, and here's a fish. Pretty rare. I've only got two like this.
Now here is a unique specimen. It's the world's best faulted fish fillet. This unique specimen is now in Amherst College's Benesky Museum. The fault had no vertical offset, so the fish fossil remained on the same bedding plane.
Here's one of my favorite what can go wrong specimens. When I made the cut, I realized I cut right through another fish. So you can see that it's very easy to lose specimens. For every one you get, you probably lose 5 or 6. So to get everything to go right in the specimens that you've seen is a triumph. What everybody lives and dies for in the fish world are mass mortality plates. Something has happened into the lake, and a lot of fish have died at one point in time. And then here's the coprolites from these fish, the little white spots here. Maybe that's an indication that the fish are stressed and that they're dying off. So that's a mass mortality plate. This is a very special layer. This is perhaps at the very top of the Black Shale Formation, and it's actually a little bit of a sandstone layer. Just above this, it turns to traditional sandstone that's yellow and brownish in color. So this is one of the last layers of the lake, and it is the highest and last layer that shows evidence of life. The evidence are these little scattered fish scales. So I consider this a very, very special layer representing the death of a lake. Here's a specimen that I split open. Where my thumb is a coprolite. But that's rather large to be a coprolite from the small fish that we have, that there's something larger swimming around. And this would be the Diplurus. Also, on the right-hand side, you see this kind of leafy, veiny pattern. It could be part of the bark of a tree trunk. So that's a tour through, let's say, some of the highlights. What excites me the most is if I can find something that's not an ordinary fish. Always on the look. Will there be a fish on the inside? Now look here. Here's the imprint of that tail. But the rest of the fish is up here. So the specimen kind of split. Part of it went this way, and the rest is here. Anytime you get an intact fish, it's a success. I got a fish that was this big. Well, maybe this big. No, maybe this big. No, maybe this big. But that'll do. I'm happy.